In these videos, I'm trying to address the question of the polarisation of our society and the trouble it's causing. And the way I was going to do this is to look at the underlying trickery of polarisation. In other words, each of these polar things, right, left, black, white, so on, so, is a useful thing for making decisions. But often when you look closely, there's actually a trick there. I gave two examples of my last one. One is the idea that something can be absolutely good versus something that's absolutely bad. And I point out that that would be completely sterile. The problem is there's always a mix of a little bit of the other in it, and that's what makes it troublesome. And the other is that things like right, left, people forget that these are directions. They describe a continuum, and they instead try to put a barrier down the middle of it and say, this is right, this person is right, this person is left, this person is black, this person is white, when actually you've got a whole spectrum between the two. Now in this video, I'm going to look at some more of these meaningful distinctions and to see at what point the meaning seems to break down, where again there's a trick. And the first one is the idea of the individual versus the society. Now, in the media, there's been a lot of criticism of individualism. There's a tendency to point out quite truly that humans are herd animals and that part of our strength, our survival over thousands and thousands of years, is the way we can herd together and all fight for a common cause. It's the unity is strength. And there's an equal tendency to say when things go wrong, oh, that's because of individualism. Individualism increases the money differential. Billionaires want more and more money because they're individualistic and they're greedy. Now that doesn't ring quite true to me, because the whole value of money is the value that society gives us. So a lonely man Friday on a desert island all alone, give him £1 billion, he wouldn't be able to do anything with it except light fires. It's got no value. So to blame the desire for money on the individual when actually it's about the relationship between that individual and society. And similarly, someone who wants to have a Lamborghini, well, that's greedy, isn't it? But the thing is, as an individual, you might be a mechanic who just loves the quality of the craftsmanship and everything in a Lamborghini and wants it for that. But I think there's much more to that. Most people who want one, they want to be seen in it. So they want to change their relationship with society. It's all the fault of society's values, you could say. So to blame the whole thing on individualism, to me, is missing the point. This tendency to say everything that's good is society and everything that's bad is individual. I tried to address this in about 1980 when Liz Green wrote a piece, that's the Jungian astrologer, wrote a piece about the way that the society has projected its shadow onto the lonely woman. And she thinks in terms of polar opposites. And so the age of Pisces, the opposite sign to that is the sign of Virgo. And she points out that this didn't mean just a woman who hadn't had sex. A Virgo was an independent woman, unmarried, independent. And for the last 2,000 years, that has taken a very negative shadow projection, which goes all the way from just sort of family pressures around the world, that a daughter must marry in order to be meaningful, in order to be a member of society, right up to the sort of persecution of witches that leads them being burnt and hanged rather, sorry. So, so this is a real projecting an unconscious fear, a shadow fear, onto these lonely women. And when I read that in about 1980, I thought, we're coming up to the age of Aquarius, so what is the polar opposite of Aquarius? What's the new shadow going to be? And I decided that opposite Aquarius is Leo, the king, the ruler, the lion. And this is the man who rules his own kingdom, i.e. the individual in those terms. Just as Aquarius is very much about the collective, democracy, equality, rationalism, and all that. Leo, opposite that, is the individual. And I could see this persecution rising, and I've seen a lot of it since, typified for me by every time you have some atrocity, like a school shooting or something like that. The media goes in to ask, who could do such a thing? And the sort of answer they're looking for is, oh, well, he was a bit of a loner. He wasn't one of the lads. He didn't join in like that. And so idea is spreading that to be a loner is to be something rather dangerous, to be suspicious of the loner. And on a sort of opposite end of the scale, if Aquarius represents democracy, I've heard a lot of politicians arguing that we face a very dangerous time now because democracy is being threatened by the rise of totalitarianism, by dictators. Again, individuals who are trying to run a country in an individualistic way. So I think this is a very serious opposition, a serious polarity, the polarity between individual and society. And that's why I thought it was important to address it. Now take that suspicion of the loner. Now, in those terms, I've done the most suspicious and individualistic thing possible back in 1978 when I did the Abramelin operation. Because it means dedicating 6 months to a personal project. And to quite an extent, you're supposed to cut yourself off from society to do this, to hide away. And I wanted to do that until I realized that we're not in the world when Abramelin book was written, a world when people could go off into the desert or become a hermit. And society recognized the role of a hermit as someone who must be left alone. Nowadays, there's this suspicion of the loner. If I put a notice on my door saying, keep out, magical operation in process, no human contact wanted, it would have aroused suspicion. I would have had people knocking on the door to see if I'd gone mad. I would have had the press looking in to see if I was a Satanist. I've had the police coming to see whether I was a paedophile or something. It's just asking for trouble. So the problem I had was, how does one actually commit oneself to a thing like this in our age where being a loner is considered suspicious? Now, I wrote about this a bit in the Abramelin Diary book, and I explained how important it was the way you word your initial oath. I put a lot of emphasis on this. And the way I worded it, I said, I'm going to do this operation absolutely to the best of my ability. But what if there's life-threatening danger to a member of my family or a friend? Or what if the police come and put me in prison or something like that? Can I honestly say I'm going to continue this thing? So what I said is that in the event of overwhelming societal pressure or else danger to a close family or friend, I will take that as a message from my guardian angel that I should stop this. In other words, I sort of made a pact with the Holy Guardian Angel to explain this is my vow and this is how far I'm going to go. Now, this led to, I had to think about this very carefully. The sort of thing that happened, and at the beginning you can mix a bit. It's really, as the 6 months go on, it gets stricter and stricter. But at the beginning, having just been an ordinary member of society, well, the first thing was, do I try to go into a lonely place? And that wouldn't work, because when a single man turns up in the middle of nowhere in the English countryside, immediately arouses either suspicion or concern. I'd be likely to get old ladies bringing round cakes for me. Perhaps he's unhappy in love. I wonder if he's miserable. Or else, again, the police coming to see whether I'm a Unabomber or something like that. No, I decided to stay where I was living, which was a sort of suburban area, because simply I'd been seen around for a few years and I'd still be around and I wouldn't create any new thing. But as I was on my familiar territory, I had a few invitations, and one of them, which I wrote up, was an invitation to a sherry party. Now, can I possibly be doing the Aberlin operation while I attend a sherry party? And the answer is, I could. I'm not allowed to drink sherry because I made a vow against alcohol. Yeah, but at a sherry party, there's always stuff for for people who are driving or whatever. They'll have some fruit juice or something, so that's okay. There were lots of tasty little things there. There was prawns and sausages and things like that. And of course I made a vow not to eat flesh. But there's also cheese and biscuits and crudité. So that was no problem. So now it's a question of how do I socialise? And basically what I did is I said to myself, here am I made a vow to do this operation, and I've been invited to a sherry party. How am I going to manage that? Well, I have to see it as a test. Basically, the Holy Guardian Angel put me in this position to see how I could cope. Would I just fall back into the old ways and have sherry and this, that, and the other? What do I do when I talk to people? Well, basically, I just was pretty boring. I made light conversation, that sort of thing. What are you doing now? Oh, I'm taking a sabbatical. People understand sabbaticals. What are you doing? Well, just at present I'm trying a sort of meditation retreat, but I don't want to say too much about it because, it'll sound a bit stupid. I'll tell you about it when it's finished. And that way I sort of could fob people off without being polite, without drawing attention, things like that. And what I was doing was the equivalent of the sort of oath of the abyss that people at Cefalù, Crowley's Abbey of Thelema, did, which is to say, I will interpret everything that happens as a message from God to me. And that's really what I was doing. When I faced these things which looked like breaking the thing, I said, no, I'm being tested to see how I can keep my individualism, my focus on the operation while I'm doing this. So that's what I mean when I say that what I was doing was an extremely individualistic thing. It would have created so much suspicion if the word had got around that I was doing this magical operation. And so I had to make myself invisible, practically. Now, the interesting thing is that here am I committing what society might consider the greatest sin possible. I'm being individualist. I'm turning my back on humankind. But as I've described, one of the things I was doing for those 6 months was removing the labels that society had put on me, detaching from them. Because how would society describe me in an article, say? They would begin by saying Lionel Snell is a 79-year-old, Oxbridge educated, English man, blah, 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 blah. Now, thing is, if you look at those labels, 79-year-old, well, last year I was only 78. 30 years ago, I was 49. Was I not me then? No, I was absolutely me. So that's just a label. I'm not attached to it. English. Well, yeah, I'm English, but I've been living for 20 years in South Africa, and I could always apply for a South African passport and become a South African. The next day, would I wake up and not be me? No, still be me. So it's just a label I can detach from. Man. Now this is a bit tricky, but I could, and I've had friends who've done this, taken hormone therapy and an operation and changed sex. Now, I definitely would feel a bit different, but would I not be me if I did that? Would I no longer be the person who wrote Thundersqueak, Sosopomy, and those books? No, I'd still be me. So this again is a label that society has put on me, and so on. Now, what I found doing this was that as I removed these labels, I got closer and closer to something very big, which I called my common humanity. Now, I'm not making any great claim that I sort of reached nirvana and I absolutely got to the end of this, but I began to realize that the state I was in as I got detached more and more of these labels was actually the same state as anybody would be in if they did the same thing. In other words, there might be some Buddhist person in the Himalayas doing something like this, and as we sat in our silence and gazed inwards, we would actually be having exactly the same experience. So the point I'm making is, by being the most individualistic thing, the most despicable thing that society might aim at me, I actually was discovering my common humanity. I was finding the thing that linked me to all other people. Now, this is so beneficial. Why doesn't everybody do it? Well, one thing is that some people are completely attached to their labels. Being a man, that's everything. You know, I'm a man. I stick to my sex and I do manly things and read man's magazines and drink beer and all sorts of things. Some people would be horrified at the thought of having a sex change like that. It would destroy them. And similarly, being British, well, Brexit was about people. Another label was being British. Now, some people identify so much with that label that it means everything to them. So when it came to Brexit, such people were really offended at the idea of being called European rather than British. It meant so much being British. So again, they were attached to that label. Now, these attachments, although society gives us these labels, they are actually subjective, how we actually receive those labels. So again, there's a interplay between the society and the labels it gives us and how one accepts them individually. But I want to look at another polarity, which is actually closely related. And again, it's a meaningful polarity. That's between the subjective and the objective. The relationship is, of course, that something which is objective is a thing that society recognises. You know, the results are out there and everyone can check them or read the paper on it or whatever it is, or do the same experiment to get the same results. Whereas subjective is something that's in the individual. And again, although that's a meaningful distinction, what I object to is when it becomes a value judgment. Take homeopathy or acupuncture. Now, there is objective evidence that they don't work. People have told me about double-blind tests which I could look up, where a homeopathic remedy was tried and the results were no better than a placebo. But on the other hand, I've used homeopathic remedies and had very good results, and I know a lot of other people who have. So is that a counter-argument? The answer is no, that's just subjective. You're probably experiencing the placebo effect. We can show there's nothing in it. Now, the word I object to there is just. It's just subjective. What is wrong with something being subjective? Why is it inferior? Subjective feelings can be enormous. They can be overwhelming. So how can someone on the outside who's not experiencing that say, oh, that's nothing, and just dismiss it? I gave the example when I spoke at Northampton University of what for me is about the most powerful subjective feeling anyone can experience, and that is unrequited love. You know, typically a young man falls madly in love with some woman who, for him, is an absolute goddess. He would give his life for her. He would do anything. She's beyond reproach. And yet she doesn't like him or was not interested. A terrible feeling. A feeling like that has actually led to murder, it's led to mayhem, it's led to war between nations. So you can't just say it's nothing, it's just subjective. It's something very powerful. So I wanted to look at this polarity, subjective, objective, and ask why does it become a value judgment? And I illustrated this by taking my model of, the four sort of orientations of looking at the world: magical, artistic, religious, scientific, which intercept me. And I just tilted it slightly to put religion at the top and magic at the bottom, because I wanted to emphasize one of the differences between religion and magic. Now, Crowley said magic and religion are not the same, they're opposite. And I agree with him in quite a few examples, because there are several parameters where magic and religion are indeed opposite. And one of them, which I emphasize, is the extent to which religion is a group experience shared by the collective, whereas magic, which very often is looking at similar sort of factors, is very much more about the individual experience, what it does for the individual. Now, in that sense, I've put religion at the top as the most objective, collective society experience, and magic at the bottom as the most individualistic, individual thing. That's just one parameter where they're opposite. Now, to give an example of how are we expected to handle a really powerful feeling like unrequited love? What does society expect of us? I base the example on Diane Fortune's book, The Sea Priestess, where a man falls madly in love with Morgan Le Fay, and to raise the question of what might a young man do who's absolutely burning with this feeling. One thing would be to explain it. That is to say, he might say, this is overwhelming, I can't cope with it. I'm going to take a university degree in psychology to try to understand how this could be so powerful. And so he decides to explain it by studying to find out what's behind it all. It could take several forms. He might become a Jungian and explore, the relationship to the anima, to the individual man. Or he might become a neuroscientist. He might sort of look at what's happening in the brain or what the hormones are that are affecting this and causing these extraordinary feelings. Doing that is accepted by society. It's respected. It could even be the route to fame and fortune. He might get a first-class degree on the subject. He might write a book about it that becomes a respected textbook. He might even later in life build a foundation or a department concentrating on this aspect. All those things would lead him up towards public recognition and respect. But not everyone is an explainer. Another thing he could do is, instead of explain, he could express. He might write a novel based on this powerful feeling he had. He might write an opera. He might write a pop song. He might lead to a film script exploring this very powerful subjective feeling. And again, that is understood by society. It's respected. And again, he could be on the way to fame and fortune. But if instead he looks at it subjectively, he turns in on himself to explore instead of expressing or explaining, to explore, he wins much less respect. In this example, I said, what if he, as in the sea priestess story, what if he decides, as he's burning with this feeling, to go to a beach at dusk when the sun is going to set and the full moon is going to rise, and he's going to light a fire of Azrael on the beach and sit in meditation, dialoguing with the moon as it rises, and spend the whole night talking to the moon and listening inside himself. That in order to try to form a relationship with the goddess and find some resolution of this agony he's feeling. Would that be respected by society? On itself, no. He'd be considered a bit of a nutter. Yeah. Oh, he's obviously gone over the top. He's gone crazy. Why? Because again, the subjective approach, and therefore in many cases the magical approach, is not respected by society. The sort of criticism he'd face, again on this sort of objective-subjective thing, would be, people would say, that's absolutely ridiculous. The moon. You know it's a huge lump of rock, thousands of miles away in space. You can't touch it. But through a telescope, you can almost imagine you're touching. Look at the rough surface. You can see it's rock. It's out there. Whereas women, they're all around you. They're part of your life experience. They're on Earth. They've got nothing to do with the moon. There's no connection there. Now, and so to address the moon because you've got trouble with women is utterly ridiculous. Now, I object to that because everything we know about the moon, all the facts and figures we've learnt over the years, every experience we've had of the moon, wonderful moments gazing at the moon as it rises in the past, that sort of thing, your childhood awe of a full moon and all that. As you look through a telescope, there's the moon looking so vivid you feel you could almost touch it and feel the roughness of the surface. All that is a totally interior experience. Those photons coming through the telescope into your eye, they're just photons. They're converted into electrical signals going into the brain. And the whole moon experience is actually mapped inside your brain. Now, similarly, your whole experience of womankind through your life, from being in a womb, to suckling your mother's breast, to teasing girls in the playground, to falling in love with your other girls, things like that. The whole experience of womanhood, and aunts and mothers and so on and so forth, it's all mapped and held in the brain. And the question I ask is, how could you possibly think that these two great fields of experience could somehow be in the same brain and not be connected in subtle ways? Is the brain really have an air-gapped thing of this bit's for women, this bit's for the moon, this bit's for your car, none of these things connected? Crazy. And yet people really believe that. They will argue it as an argument against subjectivity. So, what I'm saying is that just as society and individual is a meaningful distinction, and yet it becomes a value judgment, and it becomes dangerous even, certainly is deluded. So also the subjective objective is a meaningful distinction, and yet it becomes a value judgment and one gets dismissed. And so something is going wrong here. And in this series, I'm trying to address what is the problem of polarity? Where does it come from? And so in the next video, I want to look very closely at the boundary between these things. And I will be looking for a trick, or else the actual trickster that is playing this trick, in the next video.